The diamond-encrusted finger jabbed into his chest 3 times before James Mitchell even registered the pain. Patricia Sterling's voice cut through the packed dining room like a scalpel through silk, every syllable dripping with venom that made the Chateau Margaux on table 6 taste like vinegar. "You're trash. Trash." The word hung in the air, suspended between the crystal chandeliers and the imported Italian marble, freezing 87 guests mid-bite. Forks stopped. Wineglasses paused halfway to lips. Even the soft jazz from the corner speakers seemed to dim, as if the universe itself held its breath. James didn't flinch. His calloused hands, scarred from 15 years of construction work before he ever owned a restaurant, remained perfectly still at his sides. The cheap polyester apron scratched against skin that had once been toughened by carrying rebar in the August heat. Those same hands had signed the deed to this building, had hired every person watching this spectacle unfold, had built an empire worth $43 million from nothing but a dream and a dying woman's faith. Patricia leaned closer, her perfume, Tom Ford Black Orchid, $350 per ounce, overwhelmed the scent of Chef Anthony's perfectly seared scallops. A pathetic single father playing waiter. Your daughter must be so proud. The room's collective intake of breath was audible. People like you shouldn't even breathe the same air as me. What Patricia Sterling didn't know, what nobody in that room except one 63-year-old Italian chef knew, was that the man she was screaming at owned every table, every chandelier, every square inch of polished hardwood beneath her $4,000 Louboutins. But that revelation would come later. First, there were 72 hours of hell to endure. 72 hours earlier, the Brooklyn apartment smelled like burned pancakes and coffee, so strong it could strip paint. James stood at the stove in a faded NYU t-shirt, Sarah's favorite, the one she'd stolen from him during their 2nd year of marriage, flipping circles of batter that refused to cook evenly. Cooking had never been his strength. Building things, yes. Fixing broken systems, absolutely. Making breakfast without setting off the smoke alarm, that remained beyond his considerable skill set. "Daddy, you smell like restaurant again." Emily Mitchell sat at the kitchen table, 7 years old, with honey-brown hair that fell in the same waves as her mother's had. She clutched a stuffed elephant named Mr. Trunks, a gift from Sarah during her final week in the hospital, when the morphine drip had become constant and the doctors had stopped talking about remission. James set a plate in front of her, 3 pancakes that vaguely resembled the shape of a bear's face, if you squinted and used significant imagination. "Daddy's fixing something broken, sweetheart." Emily poured syrup with the concentrated precision of a surgeon. She'd developed an obsessive need for symmetry since Sarah died. Everything had to be perfect, controlled, ordered. The therapist said it was normal for children who had lost a parent. They sought control in a world that had proven itself terrifyingly unpredictable. "Is it really broken? Or are you just working too much again?" The question landed like a knife between his ribs. 7 years old and already reading him better than most adults ever had. Sarah's daughter, through and through. James glanced at the photo on the wall. Tall, their wedding day, Sarah in a simple white dress from a consignment shop because they couldn't afford anything else. Him in a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. Behind them, the tiny apartment in Queens, where they'd survived on ramen and dreams. Her smile in that photo could light up Manhattan during a blackout. The NYU teaching degree she'd earned through night classes while working 2 jobs hung beside it, the glass slightly cracked from where Emily had thrown Mr. Trunks during a tantrum 3 months after the funeral. Both, probably. Emily nodded, accepting this truth with the gravity of someone much older. She took a bite of pancake, chewed thoughtfully, then looked up with those devastating eyes, Sarah's eyes, the color of storm clouds over the Atlantic. "Mommy used to say you were good at fixing broken things. That's why she married you." The memory hit him sideways. Sarah in the hospital bed, her body reduced to angles and shadows, her hand in his, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you'll build something that matters. Not just for money, James, for people. Promise me." He'd promised. Of course he'd promised. You don't deny the dying their final requests, especially when the dying woman is the only person who ever believed you could be more than a construction worker with calloused hands and community college credits. She was right about a lot of things. Emily smiled, a rare, full smile that made his chest ache. "She said you couldn't dance, though. That part was definitely true." James laughed, despite everything. Sarah had said that, too, usually after he'd stepped on her toes during their anniversary dinners at the cheap Italian place on 47th Street. They'd danced anyway, every year, her laughing as he apologized, him trying to remember which foot went where, both of them not caring that they looked ridiculous because they had each other, and that was enough. Until it wasn't. Until the cancer came and took her in 8 months flat, so fast the oncologist kept saying aggressive and unusual and nothing we could have done differently, as if those words made death any easier to swallow. James checked his phone. 6:40 a.m. Mrs. Dorothy Campbell would arrive in 20 minutes to watch Emily while he disappeared into the role of Danny the trainee waiter for the third consecutive night. Dorothy was 68, a retired school teacher who'd known Sarah from the elementary school where they'd both worked, who'd shown up at the funeral with casseroles and tissues and an offer to help whenever he needed it. He'd needed it constantly for 2 years now. "I have to go to work in a bit." Emily's smile disappeared. Her small hand gripped the fork tighter. "Will you come kiss me good night?" "You'll be asleep when I get back, but yes, I always do." "Promise?" The word carried weight. Emily had learned that promises could be broken, that sometimes people went to sleep and didn't wake up. That hospital smelled like disinfectant and death, no matter how many flowers you brought. "To the moon and back promise." It was their phrase, the one Sarah had invented during bedtime stories when Emily was 3 and the world still made sense. Emily's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "Okay, but Daddy?" "Yeah, baby. Whatever's broken at your work, don't let it break you too." 7 years old. 7 goddamn years old, and already carrying wisdom that shouldn't fit inside a child's heart. James crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, pulled her into his arms, breathed in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, and childhood innocence that wouldn't last much longer if he didn't fix this. If he didn't stop the rot that was destroying everything he'd built in Sarah's name. "I won't let anything break me. I've got you to come home to." Emily hugged him back with fierce intensity, then released him and returned to her pancakes as if the moment hadn't just shattered his heart into smaller pieces. The file sat on the kitchen counter, manila and unremarkable, containing data that made his stomach turn. He'd read it 17 times in the past week, each reading confirming what his gut had been screaming for months. Lumiere Manhattan was hemorrhaging money, not the normal ebb and flow of the restaurant business, not the expected fluctuations of seasonal tourism or economic downturns. This was systematic bleeding, precise and deliberate, the kind that spoke of corruption rather than incompetence. The numbers told the story clearly enough. Over the past 8 months, Staff turnover had hit 40%, catastrophic in an industry where retention was already challenging. Food costs had climbed 18% despite no change in menu pricing or suppliers. The discretionary comp budget meant for fixing kitchen mistakes and smoothing over customer complaints had exploded from $1,500 per month to $12,000. But the real evidence lay in the complaints. 15 formal grievances filed against Robert Thompson, the general manager James had hired 18 months ago based on glowing recommendations and an impressive resume. 15 complaints from employees about abuse, intimidation, wage theft, and hostile work environment. All 15 had mysteriously vanished from the HR system. James had only found them because he'd hired a forensic data recovery specialist to check the servers after his quarterly audit revealed discrepancies that made his construction worker instincts scream. The specialist had recovered deleted files, wiped emails, scrubbed database entries. Someone had gone to considerable effort to bury the evidence. The question was simple. Was Robert Thompson a thief working alone, or was this bigger? The answer, James suspected, would require seeing it firsthand. His phone buzzed. Michael Davis, CEO of Lumiere Hospitality Group, his business partner, and the man who'd stood beside him at Sarah's funeral and hadn't flinched when James had punched a hole in the hospital chapel wall. "You don't have to do this. Let me hire investigators." James typed back with thumbs that had framed houses and now signed 8-figure contracts. "I built this company with my hands, Mike. I need to see it with my own eyes." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "You're risking everything. Reputation, company, custody of Emily if something goes wrong, and people start asking why you're playing undercover boss instead of being a father." The words stung because they held truth. A judge could absolutely question his judgment, could decide that a man who abandoned his daughter for days to spy on his own employees wasn't fit for custody, could give Emily to Sarah's parents, who'd been making noise about instability and concern for the child's welfare ever since the funeral. But Sarah's voice echoed in his memory, clear as the day she'd said it. "Restaurants are about people, James. The moment you forget that, the moment you see them as just labor costs or customer counts, you've lost what makes this work matter." He'd forgotten. Somewhere between opening Restaurant 12 and chasing the next deal, he'd forgotten to look at the actual people making it happen. He'd trusted managers to handle the human element while he focused on expansion and profit margins and real estate acquisitions. That trust had been a mistake. "I'm going in tonight. Keep your phone on." Mrs. Campbell arrived precisely at 7, as she had every weekday for 2 years. She smelled like lavender and peppermint, carried a worn copy of Charlotte's Web under her arm, Emily's current obsession, and asked no questions about why James needed evening coverage 3 nights running. "We'll be just fine, won't we, Emily?" Emily nodded, already climbing into Dorothy's lap for the pre-bedtime reading ritual that had become sacred in this apartment, where so many rituals had died with Sarah. James kissed his daughter's forehead, grabbed the duffel bag he'd packed with the cheap uniform and scuffed work shoes, and stepped into the elevator that would take him from father to spy. The subway ride to Manhattan gave him 40 minutes to transform. In the bathroom at Grand Central, he studied his reflection under fluorescent lights that made everyone look like death warmed over. 3 months of growing his hair out had worked. He looked different enough from the clean-cut executive who appeared in restaurant industry magazines and business journals. The scruff helped, too. He hadn't shaved in 5 days, let the gray in his beard show through. made himself look worn down and desperate. The wedding ring came off last. He stood in that bathroom stall, Sarah's ring in his palm, reading the inscription inside for the 1,000th time. Forever and always, S. Putting it in his pocket felt like betrayal. Wearing it while pretending to be someone else felt worse. He compromised by threading it onto the chain that held his dog tags from his brief stint in the Army before construction work, tucking both under his shirt where they'd rest against his heart. The uniform came from a restaurant supply store in Queens, the kind of place that sold bulk napkins and industrial-grade polyester that could survive 1,000 wash cycles and still look cheap. It scratched against his skin like penance. The name tag pinned crookedly to his chest read, Danny, in faded letters. He'd bought it used, wanted the worn appearance of someone who'd bounced between jobs, someone forgettable. The shoes were the worst. $12 slip-resistant sneakers that would destroy his feet by the end of a shift, but looked exactly right for someone barely scraping by. He'd broken them in over the past week, walking for hours in his apartment after Emily went to sleep, creating the scuff patterns and worn spots that spoke of hard miles. By the time he emerged from Grand Central, James Mitchell had disappeared. In his place stood Danny, a 45-year-old divorced dad trying to make rent, desperate enough to take a trainee position at a high-end restaurant despite having no experience. The character had a backstory he'd rehearsed 100 times. Wife left 3 years ago, daughter living with him in a studio in the Bronx. Previous work in construction until a back injury made it impossible. No college degree, no prospects, just a middle-aged man running out of options and time. It was close enough to the truth to be believable. The construction work was real. The daughter was real. The desperation was real, just pointed in a different direction. Lumiere, Manhattan, occupied a corner of 57th Street with views of Central Park that real estate agents called priceless, and James's accountant called catastrophically expensive. The building itself was a converted brownstone, 5 stories of 19th-century elegance that had cost him $8 million to purchase and another 4 to renovate. Worth every penny when the Michelin Guide gave them 2 stars and the waiting list hit 6 months for prime dining slots. Worth considerably less if the flagship location was rotten from the inside out. James entered through the service entrance, the one the guests never saw, where deliveries arrived and trash went out, and the beautiful illusion of fine dining gave way to the brutal reality of industrial kitchens and loading docks. A cook he didn't recognize, another sign of the turnover problem, barely glanced at him as he shuffled past in his Danny costume. The locker room smelled like bleach and old sweat. He stowed his bag in an empty locker, checked his reflection one final time. The man staring back looked beaten down, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes holding the particular exhaustion of someone who'd given up on dreams a long time ago. Perfect. The dining room gleamed under Edison bulbs in custom fixtures Sarah had picked out during the design phase. She'd spent weeks choosing every detail, the specific shade of cream for the walls, the weight of the silverware, the exact angle of the mirrors to make the space feel larger without being ostentatious. She'd understood something James was only now grasping, that luxury wasn't about expense. It was about care. Every surface held her fingerprints. Every choice reflected her belief that beautiful spaces should be accessible, that a teacher's salary should occasionally afford a perfect meal, that elegance didn't require exclusivity. Robert Thompson had spent 8 months pissing on her legacy. The general manager stood near the host station, perfectly pressed in an Armani suit that cost more than Danny the trainee would make in 3 months. His hair, dark brown with strategic highlights, was slicked back with enough product to waterproof a boat. He was talking to a couple in banking attire, his smile wide and obsequious, his laugh just slightly too loud. James watched him work the room, saw the calculation in every gesture. This was a man who understood power dynamics, who knew exactly how to make wealthy guests feel important while simultaneously conveying that their importance was granted by his approval. It was masterful and revolting in equal measure. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and something shifted in his expression. A tightness around the eyes, a muscle jumping in his jaw. The smile never wavered, but the hand holding the phone trembled slightly before he shoved it into his pocket. Interesting. "You, the new trainee?" The voice came from behind him. James turned to find a woman in her 30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, white serving shirt, crisp despite the early hour. Her name tag read Jennifer, and her eyes held the particular weariness of someone who'd been fighting a losing battle for too long. "Yes, ma'am. Danny. First night." Jennifer looked him over with an assessment that missed nothing. The cheap shoes, the ill-fitting uniform, the posture of a man used to hard work. Whatever she saw satisfied her. "Jennifer Lopez. No jokes. I've heard them all. I'm lead server. Been here 6 years. You'll shadow me tonight. Learn the stations. Try not to break anything expensive." Her voice carried the particular flatness of someone reciting instructions she'd given too many times to too many people who wouldn't last. The turnover rate in action. "I'll do my best." "Your best won't be good enough the first week, but that's fine. Nobody expects miracles from trainees. Just don't spill wine on the guests, and we'll get along." She handed him a stack of pristine white napkins. "First lesson, these get folded into swans. Watch." Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, turning flat cloth into elegant shapes in seconds. James watched, memorized the movements, tried to replicate them. His first attempt looked like a swan that had been hit by a car. Jennifer's expression suggested she'd seen worse. "You'll get it. Practice during downtime." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of instruction and observation. Jennifer showed him the stations, the rotation system, the particular preferences of regular customers who had standing reservations and specific demands. Table 6 always wanted their water glasses filled from the left. Table 9 required bread brought immediately, never after ordering. Table 12 was reserved for Mr. Peterson every Thursday at 7:30, had been for 4 years straight, and he always ordered the same thing: strip steak medium rare, no sides, just the meat and a glass of Malbec. The operation was precise, choreographed, a dance that looked effortless because of countless hours of practice. James had built this system from the ground up, had hired consultants to optimize every movement, had spent months testing and refining until the service was seamless, and Robert Thompson was destroying it. James saw the cracks everywhere, once he knew to look. Servers moving too fast, stressed beyond the normal demands of high-end service. Busboys, they called them service assistants now, but the job remained the same, practically running between tables, trying to cover gaps that shouldn't exist with proper staffing. The kitchen sent out dishes with longer delays than the carefully calibrated timing he'd approved. "Is it always this chaotic?" Jennifer paused in the middle of folding her 100th napkin swan. "This is a slow night. Wait until you see Friday." The implications settled like lead in his stomach. If this was slow, if this was the baseline of dysfunction, then the busy nights must be absolute disasters. "How do you manage?" Something flickered in Jennifer's eyes. Anger maybe, or resignation, or both. "We adapt, find ways to make it work despite the obstacles." The phrasing was careful, deliberately vague. James recognized the language of someone who'd learned not to complain directly, who understood that criticizing management led to consequences. "Mr. Thompson seems particular." Jennifer's hands stilled on the napkin. For a moment, James thought he'd pushed too hard, revealed too much curiosity. Then she resumed folding, her voice even quieter than before. "Mr. Thompson is very invested in maintaining certain standards." The words said nothing and everything simultaneously. Standards. What kind of standards made 15 employees file complaints? What kind of standards drove 40% turnover in 8 months? Before James could probe further, Robert's voice cut across the dining room like a whip crack. "Danny, table 6 needs bread. Move it." Every instinct screamed to turn around and fire him on the spot. Every fiber of James Mitchell's being wanted to drop the mask and end this charade before it really started. But Danny the trainee would jump at the command, would scramble to obey. So James scrambled. He grabbed the bread basket Jennifer indicated, nearly dropped it because the handle was different from what he'd expected, caught it at the last second, and hustled toward table 6, where an older couple sat studying menus with the intense focus of people trying to justify the prices. "Fresh bread, sir, ma'am." The man barely glanced up. The woman nodded without making eye contact. James set the basket down, refilled their water glasses from the left, as Jennifer had instructed, and retreated to the service station. Robert materialized beside him like a shark scenting blood. "Too slow. Guests at this level expect immediate service, not whenever you feel like wandering over. Faster next time, or you won't make it through training." The dismissal was clear. Robert turned away before James could respond, already moving toward a group of investment bankers who'd just been seated at table 9. His demeanor transformed instantly, the harsh taskmaster vanishing behind the charming host who laughed at unfunny jokes and recommended wines with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether a $300 bottle was worth it. James watched him work, saw the calculations, understood the game. Robert Thompson was running a protection racket disguised as restaurant management. Keep the wealthy guests happy at any cost, fund it by exploiting the staff and skimming from the budget, rely on high turnover to prevent anyone from staying long enough to notice the pattern. It was brilliant in its simplicity. It was also going to end tonight. But first, he needed more evidence, needed to see the full scope before he burned it all down. The evening rush began at 6:15, exactly as the analytics predicted. Tables filled in waves, the carefully orchestrated reservation system ensuring steady flow rather than overwhelming surges. It was a system James had personally designed after months of studying customer patterns and optimal kitchen capacity. Under normal circumstances, it worked perfectly. Tonight, it was being held together with duct tape and desperate improvisation. James spent the next 2 hours in controlled chaos, shadowing Jennifer as she juggled 6 tables with the expertise of someone who could calculate timing and table rotation in her sleep. He learned by doing, carrying trays, refilling glasses, clearing plates, folding napkins during the brief moments of downtime that came in 30-second bursts between crises. And he watched. Watched Robert comp an entire meal for a couple at table 4 who had no legitimate complaint, but who apparently knew someone important. Watched him pull Jennifer aside and berate her in a harsh whisper for not pushing the more expensive wine pairing. Watched him ignore the busboy, Brian, his name tag read, who was practically sprinting between stations trying to cover the work of 3 people. Every observation added weight to the case building in James's mind. Every interaction confirmed what the data had suggested. Robert Thompson was a cancer, and he'd metastasized throughout the organization. At 7:45, precisely when the reservation system showed a brief lull before the second wave, Jennifer pulled James toward the kitchen. "You should meet Chef. He likes to know who's working his dining room." The kitchen was controlled chaos, a symphony of flames and shouted orders, and the precise choreography of people who'd worked together long enough to anticipate each other's movements. At the center stood Chef Anthony Romano, 63 years old, with hands that moved with the precision of a surgeon and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He looked up as they approached, those eyes sweeping over James with an assessment that lasted perhaps 2 seconds and somehow absorbed every relevant detail. "New trainee, Chef. Danny. First night." Anthony's gaze lingered on James's hands, the calluses, the old scars, the way he held himself. A flicker of recognition passed through those sharp eyes, there and gone so fast James might have imagined it. "Can you handle a knife, Danny?" The question held layers James didn't fully understand. He answered honestly, or as honestly as his cover allowed. "I can manage basic prep work, Chef. Nothing fancy." "Show me." Jennifer blinked, surprised. Apparently, this wasn't standard procedure for trainees, but she grabbed a cutting board and knife, set out an onion from the prep station. James picked up the knife, felt the familiar weight, the balance. He'd spent 2 years working in Anthony's kitchen 20 years ago, back when he was a 25-year-old kid trying to work his way through community college and figure out what the hell to do with his life. Anthony had taught him to respect the ingredients, to understand that cooking was about precision and timing and giving a damn about the person who would eventually eat what you made. Those lessons had shaped everything James built afterward. He diced the onion with competent efficiency, not the lightning speed of a professional, but not the fumbling of a complete amateur either. Somewhere in between, the skill level of someone who'd worked in kitchens before, but not recently. Anthony watched in silence. When James finished, the chef picked up a piece, examined the cut, then looked directly at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through the costume to the man underneath. "You've done this before." "Long time ago, Chef. Different lifetime." Anthony turned back to his station, dismissing them with the casual authority of someone who ran his domain with absolute control. But as James and Jennifer headed back to the dining room, the chef's voice followed them. "The sauce is 2 degrees too warm, James. Fix it." James froze. Jennifer had already pushed through the swinging door, hadn't heard. Anthony stood with his back to them, plating a dish with total concentration, as if he hadn't just used James's real name. "Chef?" Anthony didn't turn around. "I trained you 20 years ago. You think I don't recognize how you hold a knife? How you move in a kitchen? Please." The accent, Northern Italian, Piemonte region, thickened slightly with what might have been amusement. "Your hair is longer. You have grief in your eyes that wasn't there before. But you're still the same stubborn bastard who spent 2 years in my kitchen asking 1,000 questions about everything." James exhaled slowly. Of all the risks he'd calculated, he hadn't fully accounted for Anthony's observational skills. "How long have you known?" "Since you walked in. Your hands gave you away. Nobody who owns a restaurant empire has hands like that unless they built it from manual labor first." "Are you going to blow my cover?" Now Anthony did turn around, and his expression was serious. "Why are you here, James? Why play these games instead of just fixing what's broken?" "Because I need to see it. Need to understand how bad it really is before I burn it all down." Anthony considered this, then nodded slowly. "Robert Thompson is destroying this place. Piece by piece, he's dismantling everything we built. The staff is terrified. The quality is suffering. Another 6 months, and we'll lose the Michelin stars." The assessment landed like a punch. Losing the stars would be catastrophic, not just for revenue, but for reputation. Restaurants lived and died on those stars. "I know. That's why I'm here." "Then do what you need to do, but do it fast, before there's nothing left to save." Anthony returned to his station, the conversation clearly over. James pushed through the kitchen doors, back into the dining room, where Jennifer was already fielding a complaint from table 8 about the temperature of their soup. The rest of the shift blurred together in a montage of small indignities and careful observation. James carried trays, refilled glasses, cleared plates, absorbed the rhythm of service while cataloging every instance of Robert's mismanagement. The general manager spent more time schmoozing with wealthy guests than actually managing operations. He comped liberally, 3 more meals by James's count, totaling nearly $1,000. He berated staff in harsh whispers that wouldn't carry to customer ears, but left the recipients looking shaken. And he never, not once, actually helped with the work. By 10:30, the last guests were finishing desserts, and the staff was beginning the closing procedures that would take another hour minimum. James's feet ached in the cheap shoes. His back protested from posture that wasn't natural to him. His hands cramped from gripping trays differently than he was used to. It was exactly how Danny the trainee should feel. Jennifer found him in the service station folding napkins for tomorrow's lunch service. "You did okay for a first night, better than most. Some of the swans are still drunk, but they'll improve." "Thanks, it's more physical than I expected." "Wait until you do this 6 nights a week for months on end." The bitterness in her voice was impossible to miss. "How long have you been doing this?" "6 years here, 12 in the industry total." She started counting cash in the tip jar. They pooled and divided at the end of each shift, and her movements held the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this calculation 1,000 times. "You ever think about doing something else?" Jennifer's hands paused on the bills. "Every day. But I've got 2 kids and no degree. This job pays better than most options available to me. So I show up, do the work, and try not to think about what my life might have been if I'd made different choices 15 years ago." The resignation in her voice made James's chest tight. This was what happened when you stopped seeing employees as people. When you forgot that behind every name tag was a whole human with dreams and fears and children depending on them. Robert Thompson had turned living, breathing people into line items on a budget, resources to be exploited until they broke. For what it's worth, you're really good at this. The way you manage your stations, keep track of everything, anticipate what guests need before they ask. That's skill, real skill. Jennifer looked at him with surprise, then something that might have been gratitude. "Thanks, most people don't notice." "I notice." And he did. He saw exactly how much talent and dedication was being wasted, how much potential was being ground down by systematic abuse. If he'd been paying attention earlier, if he'd been doing his job as owner instead of chasing expansion deals, he could have prevented this, could have protected people like Jennifer, who deserved so much better. The guilt sat heavy in his stomach as he changed back into his street clothes in the locker room. Tomorrow night, he'd come back, and the night after that. 3 nights total, enough to see the full pattern, gather enough evidence to make the case airtight. Then he'd end this. The subway ride home gave him time to decompress, to shift from Danny back to James. He reclaimed the wedding ring from the chain around his neck, slid it back onto his finger where it belonged. The metal was warm from being pressed against his chest all night, against the dog tags and the memories and the promises he'd made to a dying woman about building something that mattered. He was keeping those promises, just later than he should have. The apartment was dark when he arrived at midnight. Mrs. Campbell had left a note on the kitchen table. Emily went to sleep at 8:30. We read 3 chapters. She asked about you twice. James tiptoed down the hall to Emily's room, eased the door open just enough to slip inside. His daughter slept peacefully. Mr. Trunks tucked under one arm, her breathing deep and even. The nightlight, a constellation projector Sarah had bought during her final months, wanting to give Emily the stars, even when she couldn't be there, cast gentle patterns across the ceiling. On the nightstand lay a piece of construction paper covered in crayon drawings. James picked it up carefully, studied the 3 figures Emily had drawn, a tall one labeled Daddy in purple letters, a small one labeled Me in pink, and between them, floating above with wings and a halo, a figure labeled Mommy. At the bottom, in Emily's careful 7-year-old handwriting, My family forever. James set the drawing down with shaking hands, leaned over, and kissed his daughter's forehead with lips that trembled. I love you, baby girl, to the moon and back. Emily stirred slightly, a small smile crossing her sleeping face, then settled deeper into dreams. James stood there for 5 more minutes, watching her sleep, reminding himself exactly why he was doing this, why he'd spent 3 nights infiltrating his own business instead of just hiring investigators, why he needed to see the rot with his own eyes before cutting it out. Because Sarah had asked him to build something that mattered. Because Emily deserved to grow up in a world where people treated each other with dignity. Because somewhere along the line he'd lost sight of those truths, and people had suffered for it. He wouldn't make that mistake again. In his own bedroom, James pulled out the file folder he'd been building, added tonight's observations, the comped meals, the staff abuse, the operational chaos, calculated the financial impact, the long-term cost of letting this continue. The numbers were damning, but numbers alone wouldn't capture the full picture, wouldn't show the exhaustion in Jennifer's eyes or the fear in how Brian jumped when Robert barked orders, wouldn't quantify the intangible damage of systematic cruelty. That's why he needed 2 more nights, needed to see the complete pattern before he acted. His phone buzzed. Michael Davis, checking in. How bad? James typed back with thumbs that felt too heavy. Worse than we thought. Going back tomorrow. Be careful, you're playing a dangerous game. I know, but it's necessary. Sarah would be proud of you. The words hit harder than expected. James set down the phone, picked up the photo from his nightstand. Sarah holding newborn Emily in the hospital, her face radiating joy despite the complications that had nearly killed them both during delivery. The doctors had said the cancer might have started then, triggered by the hormonal chaos of pregnancy, though they'd never know for certain. Sarah had never regretted it, had said with absolute conviction during one of their final conversations that Emily was worth everything, worth the pain and the fear and even the dying, because bringing that child into the world was the most important thing she'd ever done. I'm trying to live up to that, love, to your faith in me, to the promises I made. The photo didn't answer. Photos never did. But somehow, in the silence of the apartment where their family had been whole once, James felt her presence, felt the weight of her expectations, and the warmth of her belief that he could be the man she'd married, the one who built things instead of destroying them, who saw people instead of profit margins, who gave a damn about making the world slightly better. He would be that man again. Starting tomorrow night, when he went back into Lumiere and continued building the case that would end Robert Thompson's reign of petty tyranny. But tonight, he was just a father in an empty bedroom, holding a photograph of the woman he'd loved and lost, trying to figure out how to keep promises to the dead while protecting the living. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of dreams, where Sarah stood in the kitchen making pancakes that actually looked like bears, where Emily was small enough to carry, where the world made sense, and cancer was just a word instead of a death sentence. He woke at 6 to Emily jumping on his bed, Mr. Trunks flying through the air like a fuzzy gray missile. "Daddy, you came home. You kissed me good night. I felt it." James caught her mid-bounce, pulled her close, buried his face in her hair that smelled like strawberry shampoo and innocence. "Of course I came home. I promised, didn't I? To the moon and back." To the moon and back. Emily wiggled free, landed on the bed with a bounce that would have woken the neighbors if the Ramirez family below didn't already have 3 kids who made considerably more noise. "Can we have pancakes again? I'll help this time so they don't burn." James laughed despite the exhaustion in his bones. "Deal, but you're in charge of not setting off the smoke alarm." They made breakfast together, Emily standing on a chair to reach the stove, her small hands carefully pouring batter, while James supervised and pretended he wasn't terrified she'd burn herself. The pancakes came out slightly better than yesterday's disaster, still not Michelin-worthy, but recognizably food. Over breakfast, Emily talked about school, about her best friend Maya, about the science project they were building, about the solar system. James listened with half his attention on her words and half on the mental checklist of what he needed to do before tonight's shift. Review the comp logs again, check the employee complaint timeline, verify the details of Robert's hiring, who'd recommended him, what the background check had shown, whether there'd been any red flags missed, build the case airtight, then burn it all down. "Daddy, you're not listening." Emily's accusation cut through his distraction. "I'm sorry, baby. You're right. Tell me again about the solar system project." She did, with the passionate intensity of a 7-year-old who discovered something fascinating. James pushed aside the spreadsheets and calculations, focused completely on his daughter's explanation of planetary orbits and why Pluto's demotion was fundamentally unfair. This was what mattered. This moment, this connection, not the restaurant drama or the financial losses or the elaborate undercover operation. But he had to fix the other things to protect this, had to root out the corruption before it destroyed what he'd built, before the empire collapsed and Emily's future security disappeared. Sarah had understood that balance, had somehow managed to be fully present for Emily while also pursuing her teaching career, managing their household on an impossibly tight budget, fighting cancer with grace and humor. She'd made it look easy when it was actually the hardest thing in the world, being everything to everyone while your body betrayed you cell by cell. James couldn't match her strength, but he could try. Could spend breakfast completely focused on Emily's solar system, despite the weight of tonight's shift pressing on his shoulders. Could choose for this hour to be just a father with his daughter instead of an owner planning corporate espionage. The choice was temporary. By noon, he'd be back in the files, reviewing evidence, building the case. By evening, he'd be Danny the trainee again, infiltrating his own restaurant for the second night of what he hoped would be a short investigation. But for now, in this kitchen, where Sarah's photo smiled from the wall, James was simply a man making pancakes with his daughter, learning about planets, remembering what it felt like to be whole. The Chateau Margaux arrived at table 14 precisely 7 minutes after Patricia Sterling ordered it, carried by Jennifer with the reverent care normally reserved for religious artifacts. $600 per bottle, 2015 vintage, a wine that had taken years to develop its complex profile of blackcurrant and cedar. Patricia didn't even look at the label before waving dismissively. Pour. Jennifer's hands moved through the ritual with practiced precision, presenting the bottle, uncorking with a soft pop that carried just far enough to signal quality, pouring exactly 2 ounces into Patricia's glass for tasting. The movements were choreographed perfectly, the result of thousands of repetitions until muscle memory took over and conscious thought became unnecessary. Patricia swirled the wine with the aggressive motion of someone who'd learned the gesture from watching others rather than understanding the purpose. She brought it to her nose, sniffed with theatrical intensity, then sipped. Her face contorted as if she'd just tasted poison. "It's corked." The words dropped into the dining room like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in concentric circles of tension. Nearby tables glanced over. The soft jazz seemed to dim. Even the Edison bulbs appeared to flicker, though that was probably James's imagination working overtime as he stood frozen at the service station 20 feet away. Jennifer's expression remained professionally neutral, a mask of polite concern that revealed nothing of whatever she was actually thinking. "Ma'am, may I verify? Sometimes the initial pour can—" "Are you calling me a liar?" Patricia's voice climbed half an octave, loud enough now that conversation at the surrounding tables stopped entirely. Melissa White and Rebecca Harris, her companions for the evening, exchanged glances that held equal parts embarrassment and anticipation. Jennifer took a clean glass from the service tray, poured herself a small amount, following protocol for verifying customer complaints. She tasted with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years developing her palate, who could distinguish between actual cork taint and simple personal preference. "I'm not detecting any TCA or oxidation, Mrs. Sterling. The wine seems perfectly—" "This tastes like wet cardboard." Patricia was on her feet now, one hand gripping the table edge, the other gesturing with enough force to make her Cartier bracelets jangle like wind chimes in a hurricane. The volume had crossed from merely loud into territory that made other guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. "You're trying to pawn off a bad bottle because you think I won't notice. You think I'm some idiot who doesn't know wine." James's hands clenched around the water pitcher he'd been holding for the past 30 seconds. Every instinct screamed to intervene, to step between Jennifer and this woman who was publicly humiliating an employee over a bottle that almost certainly had nothing wrong with it. But Danny the trainee wouldn't intervene. Danny would stand there and watch, helpless and invisible. Robert Thompson materialized from wherever he'd been lurking, moving with the urgent speed of someone responding to a 5-alarm fire. He didn't taste the wine, didn't consult Jennifer, didn't even glance at the bottle to verify the vintage. "Mrs. Sterling, my sincerest apologies. We'll bring you another bottle immediately, completely on the house." He turned to Jennifer with eyes that promised consequences. "A word. Back office. Now." Jennifer's face went pale beneath her professional composure. She set down the wine glass with a hand that trembled just slightly, then followed Robert toward the kitchen, with shoulders squared like someone walking to their execution. James tracked their movement through the dining room, watched them disappear through the swinging doors, calculated how long it would take Robert to deliver whatever abuse he had planned. 3 minutes, based on previous patterns, maybe 4 if he was really wound up. Patricia settled back into her chair with the satisfied air of someone who'd just won a battle. She picked up the wine glass, the supposedly corked wine, and took a long drink. Finally, competent service is so hard to find these days. Melissa leaned in conspiratorially. You handled that beautifully. Can't let them get away with cutting corners. Exactly. Give them a uniform and they start thinking they're experts. They need to remember their place. The conversation continued in that vein, Patricia and her friends dissecting the failures of service workers with the casual cruelty of people who'd never considered that uniforms covered actual humans with hopes and fears and children waiting at home. James refilled water glasses at table 6 with hands that wanted to shake, but remained steady through sheer force of will. He'd spent 45 years learning to control his body's responses, to channel rage into productive action rather than destructive impulse. Construction sites required that discipline. One moment of lost control around heavy machinery could kill someone. Restaurant ownership demanded it too, though the stakes were different. Tonight, that discipline was being tested. Jennifer emerged from the kitchen 4 minutes later with eyes that were red-rimmed but dry. She moved directly to the bar, collected a fresh bottle of the same wine, $600 the restaurant would now eat, and returned to Patricia's table with her professional mask firmly back in place. Robert reappeared moments later, gravitating immediately toward a group of hedge fund managers at table 9. His smile was wide and warm, no trace of whatever he'd just unleashed on Jennifer in private. The transformation was seamless, disturbing in its completeness. James caught Jennifer's eye as she passed the service station. He wanted to say something, to offer some word of comfort or solidarity, but Danny the trainee wouldn't have that relationship yet. Danny would stay silent, invisible, irrelevant, so he stayed silent. The evening crawled forwards with the relentless momentum of a train that couldn't be stopped. James moved through his assigned tasks, refilling glasses, clearing plates, folding napkins during the brief seconds between demands. He watched everything, cataloging each instance of dysfunction for the file that was growing thicker by the hour. At 8:15, Melissa White knocked over her water glass while gesticulating wildly during a story about some charity gala. The glass tipped, water splashed across the white tablecloth and directly into Rebecca Harris's lap. Rebecca shrieked loud enough to make the couple at table 13 jump. "My dress! This is $8,000! And Patricia Sterling, without missing a beat, whirled on James. He'd been standing 6 feet away from the table, hands at his sides, holding nothing. Anyone with functional eyesight could see he hadn't been anywhere near close enough to cause the accident, but Patricia's gaze locked onto him with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. You clumsy oaf!" James kept his expression carefully neutral, fighting the surge of adrenaline that made his pulse hammer in his temples. "Ma'am, I wasn't near the table. Don't you dare lie to me!" Patricia was on her feet again, advancing on him with the aggressive confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for anything. Her perfume, Tom Ford, Black Orchid at $350 per ounce, overwhelmed the scent of Anthony's carefully prepared scallops as she invaded his personal space. "I saw you bump the table with your tray. Look what you did to my friend's dress." The accusation was absurd, demonstrably false, easily disproven by the security cameras that James had personally installed throughout the dining room. "That's not accurate, Miss Sterling. Your friend knocked over her own." Are you arguing with me? The entire restaurant had gone silent now. 87 guests, 12 servers, 3 bartenders, and 2 managers, all frozen in place, like extras in a movie, waiting for the director to call cut. Phones appeared in several hands, recording this scene for social media immortality. Robert sprinted over from table 9, his face a mask of panic poorly concealed beneath forced professionalism. "What happened? Mrs. Sterling, what happened? Your trainee attacked us. He threw water on my friend, and now he's standing here lying about it." Robert turned to James with eyes that combined genuine fear with opportunistic calculation. This was his chance to demonstrate loyalty to a wealthy patron, to show he'd sacrifice anyone to keep the right people happy. "Danny, what the hell is wrong with you? Apologize to Mrs. Sterling right now." James met Robert's gaze steadily, seeing the man clearly for the first time. Not just corrupt, that much had been obvious from the financial records, but desperate, terrified, operating from a place of such profound insecurity that he'd throw anyone under any bus to protect his position. "I'm not apologizing for something I didn't do, Mr. Thompson." The words came out quieter than intended, but carried in the silence. Several guests leaned forward, phones raised, capturing every second of this confrontation. Robert's face flushed red. "Then you're fired! Get out of my restaurant right now, or I'm calling the police." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. My restaurant, not the restaurant, not Lumiere. My restaurant. James felt something shift in his chest, a gear clicking into place that changed the entire trajectory of the evening. He'd planned to endure 3 full nights of observation before revealing himself, had wanted comprehensive documentation before dropping the hammer. But Robert had just claimed ownership, had just crossed a line that made waiting impossible. "Your restaurant?" The question came out soft, almost conversational. Robert didn't seem to register the danger in that tone. "You heard me. You're done. You're trespassing now. If you're not out of here in 30 seconds, I'm calling NYPD." Patricia stepped closer, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "That's right. Fired. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Go home to your motherless daughter and explain why Daddy lost another job." The room's collective gasp was audible, a sharp intake of breath from multiple sources simultaneously. Several people who'd been recording lowered their phones slightly, as if suddenly uncertain whether they wanted to be associated with whatever was about to happen. James felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. Sarah's daughter, their Emily. This woman had just weaponized his 7-year-old child's grief, had turned the death of a good woman into ammunition for a petty restaurant dispute. Patricia wasn't finished. "Honestly, the trash they hire these days." She turned to Melissa and Rebecca with a laugh that carried across the silent dining room. "Trash. TRASH. That's what you are. That's all you'll ever be." The words crystallized something in James's mind, brought perfect clarity to a decision that had been building since the moment Patricia walked through the door. He'd spent 2 nights gathering evidence, documenting abuses, building a case that would satisfy any lawyer or board member. But this wasn't about lawyers anymore. This wasn't about documentation or procedures or following proper protocols. This was about Sarah's belief that restaurants were about people, about the promise he'd made to build something that mattered, about protecting Jennifer and Brian and every other employee who'd been ground down by Robert's systematic cruelty and Patricia's casual destruction. James reached up slowly, fingers finding the cheap name tag pinned to his polyester apron. The metal pin resisted briefly before giving way. He held the tag for a moment, looking at the faded letters spelling Danny that represented 2 nights of invisibility and humiliation. Then he dropped it on Patricia's table, right next to her glass of perfectly good wine that she'd claimed was corked. "You called me trash, Mrs. Sterling." His voice had changed. The defeated monotone of Danny the trainee was gone, replaced by something that carried authority like a physical force. Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "Interesting choice of words." Robert grabbed his arm, fingers digging in with desperate strength. "Danny, I'm warning you. My name isn't Danny." The words fell into silence so complete that the ventilation system became audible, a soft hum that had been drowned out by conversation and music until this moment. James straightened. The hunched posture of a beaten-down middle-aged man vanished, replaced by the bearing of someone who'd built an empire from raw materials and willpower. His shoulders squared, his spine aligned. Even his face seemed to change, the mask of defeat falling away to reveal something harder underneath. "My name is James Mitchell." He picked up the name tag from where it had landed, beside Patricia's wine glass, held it up so the entire restaurant could see the cheap plastic and faded letters. "And this restaurant, every table, every chair, every bottle of wine you've been drinking for free, belongs to me." Patricia laughed. It was a harsh barking sound that held no humor. "This is rich! The help is having a mental breakdown. Someone call security." But Robert wasn't laughing. Robert was staring at James with the expression of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. The color had drained from his face so completely that he looked like he might pass out. "Mitchell, James Mitchell, the founder?" His voice came out as barely more than a whisper, thick with the sudden understanding that he'd just fired his own boss. "The owner, the man who signs your paychecks, Robert." James paused, letting that sink in, watching recognition dawn in the eyes of servers and guests alike. Or rather, the man who used to. The heavy oak doors at the restaurant's entrance swung open with dramatic timing that couldn't have been better if James had scripted it. Michael Davis strode in with the commanding presence of someone whose Marine Corps training never really left him, flanked by two security guards in dark suits who looked like they'd stepped straight out of a Secret Service detail. Michael's gaze swept the room, taking in the frozen tableau. James in his cheap uniform, Robert pale as death, Patricia confused and angry, the watching crowd of guests with their phones still recording. "Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Sterling." Michael's voice carried the kind of authority that made people stand straighter without conscious thought. He crossed the dining room in measured strides, stopped beside James, and extended his hand. "James!" They shook firmly, two men who'd known each other long enough that words were often unnecessary. Michael turned to address the room at large, his voice projecting to every corner without shouting. "I'm Michael Davis, CEO of Lumiere Hospitality Group. For those who don't recognize my business partner here, which seems to be most of you based on the confusion I'm seeing, you've just had the honor of meeting James Mitchell, founder and owner of this restaurant and 11 others across 3 states." The statement landed like a bomb. Phones that had been lowered came back up. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Patricia's friends exchanged horrified glances. Patricia herself had gone very still, her expression cycling through disbelief, recognition, and dawning horror in rapid succession. This can't be." Her voice trailed off as Michael pulled out a tablet, swiped through several screens, then began reading in a tone that suggested he was reciting grocery lists rather than condemning someone's career. "Robert Thompson, employed as general manager of Lumiere Manhattan for 8 months. Compensation budget analysis reveals irregularities totaling $73,000 over that period." Robert's knees actually buckled. He caught himself on the back of a chair, white-knuckling the upholstery. Mrs. Patricia Sterling, 6 complimentary meals over the past 4 months. Total value $6,100, all logged under VIP marketing, despite no formal business relationship with Sterling Developments. Patricia's hand flew to her throat, fingers touching the Cartier diamonds, as if they might provide some protection against what was happening. Michael continued with the relentless precision of someone reading charges at a court-martial. David Paulson, listed as your brother-in-law. Robert, $8,200 in comped expenses over 6 months. Catherine Thompson, your sister, $4,800. We cross-referenced all entries with your social media accounts. Every single VIP comp matched a personal connection. The tablet screen glowed in Michael's hands, displaying spreadsheets that James had spent weeks compiling. Evidence that was now being presented to a room full of witnesses, many of whom were still recording. But here's what really gets interesting. Michael swiped to a new screen, and even from 20 feet away, James could see Robert flinch. We also found records of your gambling debts. $183,000 owed to various Atlantic City casinos, plus medical bills for your father's Alzheimer's care at Brookdale Senior Living. $12,000 per month, none of it covered by insurance. Robert made a sound like a wounded animal. His hands were shaking so badly now that he had to grip the chair with both hands to stay upright. I needed my father. I couldn't let him suffer in a state facility. The words came out broken, barely coherent. James felt a flash of something that might have been sympathy. Might have been if Robert hadn't spent 8 months terrorizing innocent employees to fund his problems. If you'd come to me about your father, we could have worked something out. James's voice was quieter now, but it still carried in the silence. The company has programs for exactly these situations: medical hardship, family care, employee assistance. We built those programs specifically so people wouldn't have to choose between their jobs and their families. He took a step closer to Robert, who seemed to shrink with each word. But you didn't ask for help. You stole. And worse, much worse, you terrorized people who were already struggling. You made Jennifer's life hell because she wouldn't push expensive wine on budget-conscious guests. You threatened to fire Amanda because she wasn't upselling enough, knowing she needed this job to pay her mother's cancer treatments. You made Brian work triple stations because you wouldn't approve proper staffing. Robert was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face, his expensive suit crumpling as his body seemed to fold in on itself. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll pay it all back, every cent. Sorry doesn't pay Jennifer's therapy bills for the anxiety you gave her. Sorry doesn't give back the sleep Amanda lost worrying about her mother. Sorry doesn't fix what you broke. James turned to Michael. Get him out of here. The security guards moved forward with practiced efficiency. They lifted Robert by his arms, supporting his weight, as his legs seemed incapable of holding him upright. Michael delivered the formal termination in the same emotionless tone he'd used for reading the evidence. Robert Thompson, your employment with Lumiere Hospitality Group is terminated immediately for gross misconduct, willful mismanagement, and felony theft. These gentlemen will escort you to your office to collect personal belongings. You will not touch any computers or files. You will not speak to any staff members. You will then be escorted out through the service entrance. He paused, letting Robert absorb this, then continued. Our legal team will contact you at home tomorrow morning to discuss a restitution plan. If you cooperate fully and immediately, we will not file a police report. If you fail to cooperate in any way, we will pursue felony embezzlement charges with the district attorney. Are we clear? Robert nodded, unable to form words through his sobbing. Take him. The guards began the long walk toward the kitchen, half carrying Robert between them. Every step of that journey played out in full view of the dining room's occupants. Servers who'd been terrorized for months watched with expressions ranging from satisfaction to pity. Guests who'd witnessed the confrontation lowered their phones, as if suddenly aware that they were watching a man's life disintegrate in real time. The kitchen doors swung open as they approached. On the other side, lined up along the prep counter, stood Chef Anthony and his entire kitchen staff. They'd heard the commotion, had emerged to witness Robert's removal. Anthony stood in the center with arms crossed, his weathered face showing no emotion whatsoever. The line cooks flanked him like an honor guard, their whites spotless, their expressions neutral, but their eyes tracking Robert's progress with the attention of people who'd been waiting for this moment for months. Robert saw them, made a sound that was half sob, half moan. These were the people he'd screamed at for minor mistakes, had blamed for his own failures, had treated with contempt because he could. Now they watched him being marched out in disgrace, and their silence was more damning than any words could have been. The kitchen doors swung shut, cutting off the view. Robert was gone. The dining room released a collective breath. Then, slowly, someone started clapping. It was the older gentleman at table 9, silver-haired and distinguished in a way that spoke of old money rather than new. His applause was measured, deliberate, the sound of someone acknowledging a performance well executed. Others joined in, then more. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was applauding, some people standing, phones forgotten, as they participated in this moment that felt simultaneously surreal and absolutely necessary. James raised his hand, and the applause died. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your evening." His voice carried easily now, no longer constrained by the performance of invisibility. "My name is James Mitchell. I built this restaurant 6 years ago because my wife believed I could create something meaningful." He gestured to the wall where photographs hung in carefully curated frames. The grand opening, him and Sarah cutting a ribbon, her smile radiant, despite the cancer that was already growing in cells they didn't know were betraying her. She was wrong about many things. She thought I could dance. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, tension breaking slightly. But she was right about restaurants. She taught me that how you treat someone says nothing about them and everything about you. The words settled over the room with the weight of truth. James saw several guests nodding, others looking thoughtful, a few glancing at Patricia with expressions that suggested they were reevaluating their entire perception of the evening. "These people," he gestured toward Jennifer and Brian and the other staff members who'd gathered at the edges of the dining room, drawn by the commotion. "These people are the heart of Lumiere. From this moment forward, they will be treated with the dignity they deserve, and any guest who cannot manage basic human decency will be asked to leave regardless of their bank balance or social connections." The message was clear. James let it hang in the air for a moment, then added, "Drinks are on the house for the rest of the evening. Thank you for your patience." That got genuine applause, warmer this time, appreciative rather than simply shocked. Conversations resumed gradually, the dining room slowly returning to something approximating normal function, though the atmosphere remained charged with the electricity of having witnessed something extraordinary. James turned his attention to Patricia Sterling. She stood frozen beside her table, trapped between her seated friends and the exit, her face a study in controlled panic. The Hermes Birkin bag, $300,000 worth of Himalayan crocodile leather, hung from her arm like a shield she hoped might protect her from whatever was coming next. Mrs. Sterling, we're not quite finished." Patricia's mouth opened, closed, opened again. When she finally found her voice, it came out defensive and sharp. "If I'd known who you were, would that have changed how you treated me?" The question stopped her mid-sentence. She blinked, clearly not having anticipated being challenged rather than appeased. That's not... You were dressed like a waiter." "I was dressed like a waiter because I am, temporarily, a waiter. Does the uniform change whether I deserve basic human respect?" Patricia's hands clutched her bag tighter. "You're twisting my words." "I'm asking a simple question. Would you not have mocked my dead wife if you'd known I owned the building?" The room went silent again. This was different from the earlier confrontation, less theatrical, more personal. James could see people leaning forward, could feel the weight of collective attention focusing on this moment. Patricia's face crumpled slightly, the mask of confidence slipping to reveal something raw underneath. "That was... I didn't mean..." "Yes, you did. You meant every word, because you thought I was powerless. You thought there would be no consequences for cruelty as long as the target was someone you considered beneath you." He took a step closer. Patricia took a step back. "Let me tell you about my wife, since you brought her into this. Her name was Sarah. She was an elementary school teacher. Breast cancer, stage 4, diagnosed at 33. She died at 34. Our daughter was 5 years old." Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. "In her final weeks, while she was dying, she set up college scholarships for underprivileged students, used her own money, what little we had, because she believed education could change lives. That was the woman you decided to mock, to score points in an argument about water glasses." "I didn't know." "You didn't care to know. That's the difference." James pulled a business card from his pocket. Michael must have slipped it to him during the handshake, prepared as always for every contingency. "This is the New York Restaurant Workers Alliance. They provide legal aid, job training, and emergency assistance for hospitality workers." He set it on Patricia's table, next to the wine she'd claimed was corked. "You're going to donate $100,000 from your personal trust fund, not your husband's accounts. I know you have it. Your grandmother left you quite comfortable, even without William's money." Patricia stared at the card as if it might bite her. 100,000? That's roughly what Robert stole from my employees over 8 months, multiplied by 10. Consider it restitution with interest. "And if I refuse?" James's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "Then tomorrow morning, Michael sends a detailed incident report to the Board of Sterling Developments, complete with security footage of tonight's performance, time-stamped evidence of your previous behavior, and statements from staff members documenting months of abuse." He paused to let that sink in. "The report will be accompanied by formal notice that Lumiere Hospitality Group is terminating all discussions regarding the Miami Beach development project. $400 million in partnership opportunities gone." Patricia's face went white, actually white, all color draining away like water from a broken dam. "You wouldn't. William worked 2 years on that deal. The board will destroy him if it falls through. They'll blame you. Yes, they'll blame you, as they should." James leaned closer, his voice dropping, but somehow carrying more weight at lower volume. "I also have very good relationships with most high-end restaurants in Manhattan. I've been in this business for 15 years, built a lot of goodwill, called in a lot of favors. One phone call from me, and you'll find yourself banned from Daniel Le Bernardin, per se, 11 Madison Park." He let the list trail off, watching understanding dawn in her eyes. "You'd blacklist me from my own city?" You tried to blacklist me from my dignity, from my ability to work, from my daughter's future security. Seems like fair turnabout." Patricia was shaking now, her hands trembling hard enough that her bracelets jangled. Melissa and Rebecca had abandoned her, gathered their things, and slipped away during the confrontation, leaving her alone to face consequences they wanted no part of. "What do you want from me?" "I already told you. 100,000 to the Workers' Alliance by end of business Friday. They'll confirm receipt and let me know." James stepped back, giving her space to process. "And one more thing. You're permanently banned from all Lumiere properties. 12 restaurants across 3 states. If you set foot in any of them, security will escort you out and will file trespassing charges." He picked up the check that had been sitting on the table throughout this entire confrontation, $847 for the meal she'd consumed before starting the water glass incident. "You still need to pay your actual bill, the items you consumed, before your fraudulent complaint." James set the leather folder in front of her. "You can leave payment with the hostess on your way out." He walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Patricia alone at the table with her unpaid check and the business card for an organization she'd probably never heard of before tonight. Amanda stood at the host station, her professional composure firmly in place despite everything she'd witnessed. James paused beside her, spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "When she comes to pay, be polite, professional. Don't gloat. Just process the transaction and let her leave with whatever dignity she has left." Amanda nodded, understanding the lesson being taught. Revenge wasn't about grinding people into dust. It was about consequences proportional to actions, delivered with the same dignity you expected from others. James moved through the dining room toward the service station where Jennifer stood with several other servers, all of them looking slightly shell-shocked. He was still wearing the cheap polyester uniform, still had the scuff marks on his shoes from 2 nights of pretending to be someone else. Jennifer saw him coming and straightened, uncertain of protocol for addressing the owner, who'd spent 2 days working as her trainee. "Mr. Mitchell, we didn't know." "I know, that was the point." James looked at the assembled staff, Jennifer, Brian, the bartenders, the food runners, all the people who'd been holding this place together despite Robert's best efforts to destroy it. "I need to say something to all of you, and I need you to hear it clearly." He waited until he had everyone's attention, until even the lingering guests had quieted to listen. "I failed you, all of you. I hired Robert Thompson without proper vetting. I trusted him to manage operations while I focused on expansion and profit margins. I didn't pay attention to the complaints, didn't notice the turnover, didn't see what was happening until the damage was already done." Jennifer started to protest, but James raised a hand. "No, let me finish. I built this company on principles my wife taught me, that restaurants are about people, that how you treat someone matters more than what they can do for you. Somewhere along the way, I forgot those principles. I got distracted by growth and deals and the next big thing." He pulled off the polyester apron, held it up for everyone to see. "I spent 2 nights wearing this, being invisible, being dismissed and demeaned, and treated like I didn't matter. It was educational in ways I didn't expect." James folded the apron carefully, more ceremony than the cheap fabric deserved. "This is going in my office, in a frame, on the wall where I'll see it every single day. So I never forget what it feels like to be invisible. So I never forget that every person wearing a uniform like this is a whole human being with hopes and fears and people depending on them." He set the folded apron on the service station like an offering at an altar. Effective immediately. 15% raise for all hourly staff, retroactive to January 1st. Overtime policies restructured. You work it, you get paid for it, no exceptions. Comp policy revised. Any abuse gets reported directly to me. Anonymous reporting welcomed. Zero tolerance for retaliation. Gasps from several people. Brian looked like he might cry. And one more thing. New company-wide policy across all 12 restaurants. Any guest who verbally abuses staff will be removed immediately, no matter who they are or how much money they have. Your dignity is not for sale at any price. Jennifer did cry then, tears streaming down her face as she tried to maintain her professional composure and failed completely. Mr. Mitchell, I don't thank you doesn't seem like enough. Then don't thank me. Just help me fix this. Help me make Lumiere what it should have been all along. He turned to address her specifically, his voice carrying weight that went beyond simple business decisions. Jennifer Lopez, effective immediately, your acting general manager of Lumiere Manhattan. Jennifer's hands flew to her mouth. I can't. I'm just a waitress. I don't have a degree. You have 6 years of experience in this restaurant and 12 in the industry. You know every aspect of operations better than any MBA could teach. You've been doing the job unofficially for months while Robert collected the paycheck. Now you get the title and the compensation to match. James pulled an envelope from his pocket. Again Michael's preparation paying off. $85,000 base salary, full benefits, performance bonuses quarterly. Michael will have the official paperwork drawn up by tomorrow afternoon. Jennifer took the envelope with shaking hands, opened it, read the offer letter inside, and started crying harder. I won't let you down. I know you won't. James looked at Amanda next. Amanda Clark, assistant manager, front of house operations. You held your head high tonight when someone tried to break you. That's leadership. To Brian, service training program starts Monday. Jennifer will work out the details. You'll make significantly more as a server, plus tips. Brian looked stunned, his young face struggling to process this sudden reversal of fortune. Mr. Mitchell, my sister, we really needed this. I know, son. That's why I'm doing it. The gathering broke up gradually, staff members returning to their stations to finish the evening service. Guests who'd been watching resumed their meals with the kind of animated conversation that suggested tonight's dinner would be a story retold for years. James stood in the center of his restaurant, still wearing the cheap uniform pants and scuffed shoes, and watched the machinery of service resume its rhythm. The system was good. He'd built it well, with Sarah's guidance and vision. It just needed proper management to function as designed. Patricia Sterling appeared at the host station, purse clutched tight, check folder in hand. Amanda processed her payment with professional efficiency, no trace of judgment or satisfaction visible in her expression. Patricia signed the receipt with trembling hands, turned, and walked toward the exit. Brian held the door open for her with the same courtesy he'd show any guest. Patricia paused in the doorway, looked back once at James across the dining room. Her expression was complex: humiliation, anger, fear, and perhaps the first glimmers of understanding. Then she stepped through and was gone. The heavy oak door closed with a solid thunk that felt like punctuation at the end of a sentence. James pulled out his phone, fingers finding the familiar pattern that unlocked the screen, pulled up his messages. Emily had texted twice. Mrs. Campbell must have let her use the iPad after dinner. "Daddy, are you coming home soon? I made you a drawing. It has stars. The second message included a photo of construction paper covered in silver glitter stars, dozens of them scattered across a dark blue background. In the center, three stick figures, one tall, one small, one with wings. James typed back quickly, "On my way home right now, baby. Can't wait to see your stars. I love you to the moon and back." Three dots appeared immediately, and back, always and back, and he pocketed the phone, caught Michael's eye across the room. His business partner and oldest friend was handling the final details of crowd management, ensuring guests were comfortable and the evening would end on a positive note rather than dwelling on the drama. They'd talk tomorrow, would review the complete financial damage, discuss the legal implications, plan the restructuring necessary to prevent this from happening again, would probably argue about whether James had taken unnecessary risks by going undercover, whether there hadn't been safer ways to gather the same evidence. But tomorrow could handle tomorrow's problems. Tonight, James had a daughter waiting for him with a drawing full of stars, had a promise to keep about coming home, about being present, about remembering what actually mattered in a life that was too short and too precious to waste on anything less than the people you loved. He headed for the service entrance, the same door he'd entered through 2 nights ago as Danny the Nobody. Staff members called out goodbyes, congratulations, expressions of gratitude that made his chest tight. In the locker room, he changed back into his street clothes, left the uniform in the locker for someone to deal with tomorrow. The wedding ring came off the chain around his neck, slid back onto his finger where it belonged. The metal was warm from being pressed against his chest all night, against his heartbeat, and Sarah's memory, and the promises he'd made to a dying woman about building something that mattered. He'd kept those promises tonight, had defended her legacy, had protected the people she would have cared about, had chosen human dignity over profit margins and convenience. Sarah would be proud. James hoped she could see it somehow, wherever consciousness went when bodies stopped working. Hoped she knew he was trying, stumbling, learning, but trying to be the man she'd believed he could become. The subway ride home gave him 40 minutes to decompress, to shift from owner back to father. Brooklyn appeared outside the grimy windows, familiar streets and neighborhoods that meant safety and home and the small apartment where his daughter waited. Mrs. Wools Campbell met him at the door with her usual knowing smile. Emily insisted on waiting up. I let her stay awake an extra 30 minutes, but she finally crashed around 9. Thank you, Dorothy, for everything. She's a special girl, reminds me of her mother. The words hit harder than expected. James nodded, unable to trust his voice, handed over payment for the evening plus extra that Dorothy would probably try to refuse tomorrow. Emily's room glowed with the soft light of the constellation projector Sarah had bought during her final months. Stars rotated slowly across the ceiling, creating patterns that would never exist in nature, but felt true anyway in the logic of children's dreams. His daughter slept peacefully, Mr. Trunks tucked under one arm, her breathing deep and even. The glitter-covered drawing lay on her nightstand, 3 figures and dozens of stars against construction paper darkness. James kissed her forehead gently, breathed in strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. I love you, baby, to the moon and back, always and back. Emily stirred slightly, a small smile crossing her sleeping face, then settled deeper into whatever dreams 7-year-olds had when the world still made sense. James retreated to his own bedroom, where Sarah's photograph smiled from the dresser. He picked up the frame, traced the outline of her face with one finger. I stood up for people tonight, protected the ones who couldn't protect themselves, just like you taught me. The photo didn't answer. Photos never did. But somehow, the weight in his chest felt lighter than it had in months. He climbed into bed still wearing his clothes, too exhausted to bother changing, and sleep came almost immediately, deep and dreamless and peaceful in a way it hadn't been since Sarah died. The videos hit social media before James made it home that night. By morning, #Trashgate was trending across 3 platforms with 47 million combined views and climbing. Someone had edited together the confrontation footage from multiple phones, creating a seamless narrative that required no context. Wealthy woman humiliates server. Server reveals himself as owner. Wealthy woman's world implodes in real time. The internet's response was swift and merciless. James discovered this at 6:30 a.m. while making pancakes that actually looked like bears for the first time in 2 years. Emily sat at the kitchen table, working on her solar system project, carefully gluing cotton balls to a papier-mâché Saturn when his phone started buzzing with notifications that wouldn't stop. Michael's message cut through the noise. Check Twitter, check Instagram, check everything. We're viral. James opened Twitter with one hand while flipping pancakes with the other. The top trending topic showed a freeze frame of Patricia's face, mid-scream, mouth open, diamonds glittering, the caption reading, "When Karens Meet Consequences." The comments were brutal, thousands of people sharing their own service industry horror stories, celebrating Patricia's downfall, demanding accountability from the wealthy who treated workers like disposable assets. Someone had created a TikTok mashup set to dramatic music. Another account was selling T-shirts with TRASH printed across the front. "Daddy, you're burning the pancakes." Emily's observation brought him back to the immediate crisis of breakfast. He rescued the bears before they became charcoal, served them with syrup that Emily applied with geometric precision. His phone continued its relentless buzzing. News outlets requesting interviews, business journals wanting statements, the New York Times, Washington Post, Forbes, Bloomberg. Everyone wanted the story of the billionaire restaurant owner who went undercover and publicly destroyed a socialite. Except he wasn't a billionaire. 43 million in assets spread across 12 restaurants and considerable debt didn't qualify. The media loved exaggeration. Emily looked up from her solar system. "Are you famous now?" The question deserved honesty. "For a little while, probably. People are talking about something that happened at work." "Is it good or bad?" James considered this while cutting his own pancakes into precise squares, a habit Sarah had mocked lovingly because it made him look like he was 6 years old. "Both, maybe. I did the right thing, but it's making a lot of noise." Emily nodded with the gravity of someone who understood that adult problems were complicated. "Mommy used to say, doing the right thing is hard. That's why it's right." The wisdom of a dead woman delivered through a 7-year-old's memory hit like a physical blow. James set down his fork, reached across the table to take Emily's small hand in his scarred one. "She was smart, your mom." "I know. That's why you married her." Simple truth from a child who'd lost too much too young. James squeezed her hand gently, then released it so she could return to constructing planets from household materials. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a number he didn't recognize, a 212 area code that could be anyone in Manhattan. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Catherine Ramos from the New York Times. I'm hoping to speak with you about the incident at Lumiere, Manhattan last night. Do you have a few minutes? I'm having breakfast with my daughter. Can this wait?" A pause on the other end, the sound of recalculation. "Of course. When would be convenient?" "Never, probably." But if you email my office, someone will send you a statement." He hung up before she could press further. The phone immediately started buzzing with another call. James turned it off completely, set it face down on the counter where it couldn't intrude on morning routines that mattered more than media circuses. Emily finished her breakfast, gathered her school supplies, and presented herself for the morning inspection ritual Sarah had established years ago. Backpack zipped, lunch packed, jacket buttoned correctly. "You look perfect." "I know. Mrs. Campbell says I'm very responsible." The pride in her voice was evident. James kissed the top of her head, breathed in strawberry shampoo and the fleeting innocence of childhood. "Be good at school. I love you." To the moon and back. She bounded out the door where Mrs. Campbell waited to walk her the 3 blocks to PS 321. James watched from the window until they turned the corner, a habit he couldn't break even though the neighborhood was safe and Emily was perfectly fine. Sarah used to tease him about the protective watching, used to say he couldn't keep Emily in a bubble forever, that life required risk and independence. But Sarah had never had to parent alone, had never felt the full weight of being the only thing standing between a child and orphanhood. The apartment felt too quiet once Emily left. James turned his phone back on, watched it explode with notifications again, then called Michael. "You've seen the videos." Michael's voice came through clear and calm, despite the chaos that must be erupting at the office. "Everyone's seen the videos. We're getting call requests from CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business, Good Morning America. The story has legs." "I don't want to do interviews." "I know, but we need to control the narrative before it controls us. Right now, you're a folk hero, the boss who stood up for his workers, but that can turn fast if we're not careful." James poured himself a second cup of coffee, strong enough to strip enamel, leaned against the kitchen counter Sarah had picked out during their apartment renovation. "What's the play?" "Written statement through official channels, brief, dignified, focused on employee welfare and company values. No interviews, no appearances, no feeding the beast. Let the story play out naturally while we handle the actual business of restructuring." It was sound advice. Michael had always been the strategist, the one who thought 3 moves ahead while James focused on immediate problems. "Draft something and send it over. I'll review this afternoon." "Already done. Check your email in 10 minutes." The call ended. James stood in his kitchen drinking coffee that was too hot and too strong, looking at the photo of Sarah on the wall, wondering what she'd think of all this. She'd probably laugh, would point out that he'd created a media spectacle when a quiet firing would have accomplished the same goal, would remind him that his tendency toward dramatic gestures was both his greatest strength and most significant liability. Then she'd kiss him and tell him she was proud anyway. The email arrived exactly 10 minutes later. Michael's statement was perfect, short, focused, emphasizing employee welfare and company commitment to dignity in the workplace. No mention of Patricia by name, though anyone who'd seen the videos would know exactly who it referenced. James approved it with minor edits, then forced himself to address the other urgent matter sitting in his inbox like a ticking bomb. The forensic audit of Robert's activities had uncovered more than just the comp budget fraud. There were kickback schemes with suppliers, falsified inventory reports, wage theft through systematic time card manipulation. The total damage exceeded $100,000, spread across 8 months. Worse, Robert wasn't the first. The previous general manager had been fired for similar issues 2 years ago, and the one before that had left under circumstances that James's legal team described as problematic when pressed for details. 3 corrupt managers in 4 years. That wasn't bad luck. That was systematic failure in hiring and oversight. James spent the next 2 hours on calls with HR, legal, and the recruiting firm that had vetted Robert. The firm was apologetic, but ultimately useless. Background checks had shown nothing problematic. References had been glowing. Credentials verified legitimate. Robert had simply been skilled at hiding his issues until he was embedded deeply enough to exploit them. We need to restructure the entire management vetting process. Michael's voice came through the speakerphone with the authority of someone who'd commanded Marines before commanding a corporation. New protocols for financial oversight, mandatory rotation of duties to prevent entrenchment, anonymous reporting systems that actually work. This can't happen again. Agreed. Draft the framework and we'll implement across all properties. The business calls continued until noon. James barely noticed time passing, barely registered hunger until his stomach started protesting loudly enough to penetrate his concentration. He was halfway through assembling a sandwich when the doorbell rang. The building had a buzzer system. People didn't just show up at the apartment door unless they'd been let in by someone who lived here. James approached cautiously, checked the peephole. Patricia Sterling stood in the hallway. She looked nothing like the woman from last night. No designer clothes, no jewelry, no carefully constructed armor of wealth. Just a simple black dress, no makeup, hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. She was holding something, an envelope, white and formal. James opened the door halfway, blocking entry. Mrs. Sterling? Mr. Mitchell, may I come in? Just for a few minutes. Every instinct screamed to refuse. This woman had mocked Sarah, had weaponized Emily's loss, had treated human beings like disposable commodities. She deserved nothing from him. But she was also standing in his hallway, looking genuinely broken. And Sarah had always believed in second chances, even when they seemed unearned. James stepped back, allowed her entry. Patricia walked into the small living room like someone entering a foreign country, her eyes taking in the modest furniture, the photos on the walls, the construction paper drawings held to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like letters. Thank you for seeing me. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the aggressive confidence from last night. James gestured to the couch Sarah had bought at a thrift store and reupholstered herself during one of her nesting phases. You have 5 minutes. Patricia sat on the edge of the cushion, hands folded in her lap around the envelope. Up close, without the armor of wealth and cosmetics, she looked older, tired, human in a way that last night's performance had obscured. I came to apologize, not because my lawyer told me to, though he did, because I owe you one. She opened the envelope, pulled out a check, set it on the coffee table between them. A cheap piece of furniture from IKEA that Sarah had assembled while 7 months pregnant, because James had been working double shifts. The check was made out to the New York Restaurant Workers Alliance for $100,000 exactly. I sold jewelry, the Birkin bag, some stocks from my grandmother's trust. Patricia's hands were shaking slightly. It's not nearly enough to undo the harm I've caused, but it's what you asked for, and it's what they deserve. James picked up the check, examined it. The signature was shaky, but legitimate. The account had sufficient funds. He'd verified Patricia's financial situation during the background research that had preceded last night's confrontation. Why did you come here personally? You could have mailed this. Patricia looked at him with eyes that held something he hadn't seen last night, genuine remorse mixed with bone-deep exhaustion. Because I needed you to see that I heard you, that what you said about my behavior, it landed. She took a breath that seemed to hurt. After I left the restaurant, I went home. William was already gone. He'd packed a bag and left a note saying he was staying at his club until we could discuss our future. By morning, his lawyer had contacted mine about separation proceedings. The words came out flat, emotionless, as if she'd cried herself dry hours ago. The board called an emergency meeting, voted to remove me from all official positions with sterling developments, said I was a liability to the company's reputation. Patricia's laugh was bitter and entirely humorless. 20 years of marriage, 15 years of being the perfect corporate wife, and it evaporated in one night because I was cruel to the wrong person. James should have felt satisfaction at this confirmation that consequences were real. Instead, he mostly felt tired. "I'm not the wrong person, Mrs. Sterling. I'm just the one who could fight back. You were exactly as cruel to every server and busboy and hostess who couldn't defend themselves. The only difference is that I owned the building." Patricia flinched as if struck. "I know. That's what I've been thinking about all night. How many people I've hurt who had no recourse. How many lives I've damaged because I could, because there were no consequences, because I was miserable, and took it out on people who couldn't protect themselves." She looked at the photos on James's wall. His wedding day, Emily's birth, Sarah holding their daughter in the hospital despite the IV lines and monitors. "You asked me last night what happened, why I am the way I am." James hadn't asked, but he waited. "My mother left when I was 8, just walked out one day and never came back. My father drank himself to death trying to cope. I grew up in foster care, 5 different homes in 6 years, aging out of the system at 18 with nothing." The story spilled out with the quality of something that had been held back too long. "I clawed my way up, married William because he was rich and I was pretty, and we both knew it was a transaction. Spent 20 years terrified he'd leave like my mother did, like everyone eventually does. So I became someone people were too scared to leave." Patricia's hands twisted in her lap. "I became the kind of person who hurts others before they can hurt me, who treats people like trash because if they're trash, they can't reject me. They're already beneath consideration." The psychology was textbook, the defensive mechanism obvious. James had seen it before in construction crews, in business negotiations, in 100 different contexts where people armored themselves with cruelty to avoid vulnerability. Understanding it didn't excuse it. "That's an explanation, Mrs. Sterling, not a justification." "I know. I'm not trying to justify anything, just trying to explain why I need to ask you something." She looked at him directly for the first time since entering the apartment. "How do I fix this? How do I become someone different?" The question hung in the air between them. James thought about Sarah, about the countless conversations they'd had about redemption and second chances and whether people could fundamentally change. Sarah had believed they could, had believed that anyone willing to do the hard work of transformation deserved support in that effort. James wasn't sure he shared her optimism, but he could honor her memory by trying. "You start by doing the work, not just writing checks, actually doing the work." He picked up his phone, pulled up the Workers' Alliance contact information. "You're going to volunteer, 1 Saturday per month minimum. You're going to serve food to restaurant workers who can't afford meals. You're going to listen to their stories. You're going to see what life looks like for the people you used to dismiss." Patricia nodded slowly. And you're going to keep doing it even when it's uncomfortable, even when you'd rather be anywhere else, even when it forces you to confront what you've been." James set the phone down. "Change isn't a decision you make once. It's a choice you make every day, over and over, until eventually the new patterns become who you are. Patricia absorbed this, her expression suggesting she was calculating the cost of that commitment. What if I fail? What if I try and can't maintain it? Then you fail. But at least you tried, which is more than most people manage. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Patricia stood as well, gathering her purse with movements that lacked the confidence she'd displayed last night. At the door, she paused. Your wife, Sarah. What would she think of you giving me this chance? James considered the question seriously. She'd say that grace is a gift we give to people who don't deserve it, because none of us deserve the grace we receive. She'd probably also say that you have a long road ahead and one conversation doesn't erase years of cruelty. She sounds like she was an extraordinary person. She was, and you dishonored her memory last night when you used her death as a weapon. That's not something I can forgive easily. Patricia's eyes filled with tears that she blinked back forcefully. I understand. Thank you for seeing me anyway. She left. James closed the door, leaned against it, feeling the weight of the interaction settle into his bones. The check sat on the coffee table, $100,000 that would fund legal aid and job training and emergency assistance for hundreds of workers. It was something, not enough, never enough to truly balance scales that had been tipped by years of systematic cruelty, but something. His phone rang again. Michael, with an update that shifted everything. The Times is running a feature tomorrow. They interviewed Jennifer, Chef Anthony, half the staff. The story is bigger than we thought. James's stomach dropped. What's the angle? Human interest, the worker's perspective, how you transformed the culture. It's actually positive, but it's going to generate more attention. Wonderful. The sarcasm was heavy enough to bend metal. Michael's laugh came through the speaker. You wanted to build something that mattered. Congratulations, you did. Now deal with the attention that comes with mattering. The article published the next morning with a headline that made James wince. The Boss Who Wore the Apron: How One Owner's Undercover Mission Exposed Restaurant Industry Abuse. The piece was well written, thoroughly researched, and absolutely devastating in its documentation of how systematic the problems were. Jennifer was quoted extensively about the culture of fear Robert had created. Chef Anthony provided historical context about industry-wide issues. Amanda shared her story about nearly losing her mother's care because she couldn't risk standing up to abusive management. The story went viral faster than the videos had. Within 24 hours, other restaurant workers were sharing their own experiences. The hashtag #TrashGate, hashtag evolved into something bigger, hashtag dignity in service, hashtag service workers' rights, hashtag end restaurant abuse. James watched it unfold from his office at Lumiere headquarters, fielding calls from reporters, investors, other restaurant owners who wanted to know how he'd implemented the reforms. Michael handled most of the media, but some things required James's direct attention, like the call from Sterling Development's legal team. Mr. Mitchell, we're reaching out regarding the incident involving Mrs. Patricia Sterling. The lawyer's voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone accustomed to making problems disappear through carefully crafted language. We'd like to discuss a potential settlement to avoid further public attention to this matter. James leaned back in his chair, looking at the framed trainee apron on the wall, where he could see it every day. There's nothing to settle. Mrs. Sterling made her donation as requested. She's volunteering as we discussed. The matter is resolved unless you're planning to sue me for something. A pause on the other end. Mr. Sterling, William that is concerned about the impact to his business interests. The Miami project cancellation has created significant complications. That's unfortunate. Perhaps Mr. Sterling should have been more attentive to his wife's behavior before it became a liability. We were hoping you might reconsider the partnership termination. Sterling Developments is prepared to offer favorable terms. James thought about Sarah, about the promises he'd made, about what building something that mattered actually required. Tell Mr. Sterling that Lumiere Hospitality Group partners with organizations that share our values regarding human dignity and employee welfare. If Sterling Developments wishes to be reconsidered for future projects, they're welcome to demonstrate a sustained commitment to those values over the next several years. Several years? Yes, change takes time. When they've proven they're serious about it, we can revisit the conversation. He ended the call before the lawyer could negotiate. Some things weren't negotiable. The weeks that followed blurred together in a montage of restructuring and reform. James personally interviewed candidates for the general manager position, implementing the new vetting protocols Michael had designed. He visited all 12 restaurants, spent time in each kitchen, each dining room, each service station. Jennifer thrived as acting GM, bringing organizational skills and emotional intelligence that Robert had lacked. Within a month, staff turnover dropped by 30%. Guest satisfaction scores climbed. The Michelin inspectors who'd been preparing to downgrade the Manhattan location instead upgraded it to 3 stars. Amanda proved equally capable in her new role, implementing systems for staff communication and conflict resolution that should have existed all along. Brian excelled in server training, his natural friendliness translating to exceptional customer service. The changes rippled outward. Other restaurant groups started calling, asking about the protocols. Trade publications wrote articles analyzing the reforms. Within 3 months, a coalition of restaurant owners had formed to establish industry-wide standards for employee treatment and accountability. James found himself at the center of something larger than he'd intended. Not quite a movement, but definitely a shift in how the industry thought about labor and dignity. Sarah would have loved it, would have thrown herself into the work with characteristic enthusiasm, probably would have started a nonprofit to formalize the standards and provide resources for implementation. Emily loved it too, though for different reasons. "Daddy, you're famous! Maya's mom saw you on TV." She was bouncing on his bed at 6 a.m. on a Saturday, Mr. Trunks flying through the air with each jump. James caught the stuffed elephant mid-flight, pulled his daughter down for a hug that made her squeal with laughter. "I'm not famous, just temporarily interesting to people who write news stories. Mrs. Campbell says you're a hero. Mrs. Campbell is very kind, but I'm just your dad." Emily pulled back to look at him with Sarah's eyes, serious and searching. "You helped people. That makes you a hero." The certainty in her voice was absolute. James kissed her forehead, breathed in strawberry shampoo and childhood confidence. "If I'm a hero, it's because your mom taught me how to be one." "I know. She was the best." Simple truth from a 7-year-old who carried loss with more grace than most adults could manage. James held her close for another moment, then released her to return to the important business of making Mr. Trunks fly. Later that day, James took Emily to Washington Square Park. Autumn had arrived in full force, painting the trees in colors that Sarah had loved. They claimed the swings, James pushing Emily higher and higher until her laughter echoed across the playground. "Higher, Daddy, to the moon! Any higher, and you'll actually reach it. I want to visit Mommy." The word stopped him mid-push. Emily swung back, momentum carrying her through the arc, then forward again. James caught the swing gently, slowing it until she dragged her feet to stop completely. "Emily, baby, I know Mommy's not really on the moon. I'm not a baby." She turned to look at him, her small face serious. "But you always say you love me to the moon and back, and Mommy's in heaven, so maybe heaven is on the moon." The logic was uniquely 7-year-old, mixing literal and metaphorical in ways that made perfect sense to the mind creating it. "Maybe it is. Your mom would like that. She always loved looking at the moon." "Tell me about her. Tell me everything." So James did. Told her about meeting Sarah in college when she'd spilled coffee on his economics notes, about their first apartment with the broken heater and the neighbors who fought at 3 a.m., about the day Emily was born, when Sarah had held her and cried because she was so perfect, so absolutely perfect. Told her about the cancer diagnosis, though he kept it age-appropriate. About how Sarah had fought with everything she had, not for herself, but for them, because she wanted to watch her daughter grow up. Emily listened with absolute attention, absorbing every detail like she was afraid of forgetting. "Do you think Mommy's proud of us?" James looked at his daughter, at this incredible small person who carried Sarah's eyes and smile and stubborn determination to make the world better. "I think your mom is the proudest person in heaven." "Good. I want her to be proud." They stayed at the park until the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors that reminded James of Sarah's favorite scarf. Walked home through streets that were starting to feel less empty, less haunted by absence. The apartment welcomed them with familiar warmth. Emily went straight to her room to work on a drawing. She'd become obsessed with art lately, producing dozens of pictures that covered the refrigerator and walls. James made dinner, simple pasta, because complicated cooking remained beyond his capabilities. They ate at the table where Sarah used to sit, her absence still noticeable, but somehow less painful than it had been. After dinner, Emily presented her latest drawing. 3 figures, tall, small, and one with wings. But this time, the winged figure was smiling, and above it she'd written in careful letters, "Mommy is proud of Daddy." James felt his throat close, felt tears threatening despite his best efforts at composure. "It's beautiful, baby." "I know. Can we put it on the wall next to the wedding picture?" They hung it together, Emily standing on a chair to help position it exactly right. The juxtaposition was perfect. Sarah smiling on her wedding day, and Sarah smiling from heaven, connected by the daughter who remembered her through 7-year-old understanding. That night, after Emily was asleep, James sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey and Sarah's photo. The media storm had died down to a manageable simmer. The business was stable and improving. The reforms were working. Patricia Sterling had actually shown up for her first volunteer shift at the Workers' Alliance and, according to their coordinator, had been appropriately humbled by the experience. Everything was moving in the right direction. So why did he still feel incomplete? The answer came while looking at Emily's drawing. Not the new one, but the older one from his bedroom, My Family Forever, with 3 figures and stars. He was one person trying to be 2. Father and mother, provider and nurturer, the one who went to work and the one who stayed home. He'd been managing it barely with Mrs. Campbell's help and sheer stubborn determination. But managing wasn't the same as thriving. And Emily deserved more than management. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like permission. James pulled out his laptop, started composing an email to Michael, that had been forming in his mind for weeks. We need to talk about succession planning. I want to step back from day-to-day operations, focus more on strategic direction and less on constant firefighting. Can we discuss this week? He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Michael's response came through within minutes despite the late hour. About time. Been waiting for you to realize you don't have to do everything yourself. Let's meet Tuesday. The conversation happened over coffee in the Lumiere headquarters conference room, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked Midtown Manhattan. I need to be more present for Emily. Michael nodded, unsurprised. The undercover thing taught me something. I'd lost sight of what mattered because I was too busy managing details. Emily's 7. In 11 years, she'll be heading to college. I don't want to miss those years because I was stuck in operational weeds. What are you proposing? James had spent 3 days thinking through the structure. You continue as CEO with expanded authority over operations. We hire a COO to handle day-to-day management across all properties. I transition to chairman role, strategic vision, major decisions, employee culture, but not involved in daily firefighting. Michael leaned back, considering this. It's a solid structure. We'd need to find the right COO, someone who understands the culture we're building. I have someone in mind, Jennifer. She's proven herself at Manhattan. Give her 6 months as acting COO with mentorship from you, then formal promotion if it works out. Promoting a waitress to COO. Promoting a leader who understands every level of the operation because she's worked every level, who embodies the values we're trying to establish, who earned her position through merit rather than credentials. Michael's smile was knowing. Sarah would approve. Sarah would insist. They spent the next 2 hours hammering out details, timeline for transition, compensation restructuring, communication strategy for staff and investors. By the time they finished, James felt lighter than he had in months. The implementation took another 6 weeks. Jennifer was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure when James offered her the COO track. She accepted with tears streaming down her face, talking about her kids and opportunities and proving wrong everyone who'd said single mothers couldn't climb corporate ladders. The formal announcement came in mid-November. James Mitchell stepping back to chairman role. Michael Davis maintaining CEO position with expanded scope. Jennifer Lopez promoted to acting COO with pathway to permanent position. The media covered it as a feel-good story. The waitress who became an executive, the owner who chose family over empire. James ignored most of the coverage, focused instead on the practical reality of having actual time for the things that mattered. He started picking Emily up from school 3 days a week, attended her science fair presentation about the solar system, made it to parent-teacher conferences without having to reschedule twice, cooked dinner more nights than not, gradually improving to the point where the smoke alarm stopped being a regular occurrence. On Thanksgiving, they had Mrs. Campbell over for dinner. James managed to produce a turkey that was actually edible, sides that didn't burn, and pumpkin pie that Emily declared almost as good as Mommy used to make. The compliment meant everything. After dinner, while Mrs. Campbell and Emily were in the living room reading, James stood at the kitchen window looking out at Brooklyn spread beneath gathering darkness. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Sterling. I wanted you to know I completed my 3rd volunteer shift today. It's getting easier, or maybe I'm just getting better at listening. Thank you for giving me a chance to be different. Happy Thanksgiving. James stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Keep showing up. That's what matters." He deleted the number afterward. Patricia's redemption was her own work to complete. He'd given her the framework, but the daily choice to be better belonged to her alone. Emily appeared at his elbow, Mr. Trunks tucked under one arm. "Daddy, can we look at the stars?" They went to her room, turned on the constellation projector Sarah had bought, lay on Emily's bed watching artificial stars rotate across the ceiling in patterns that would never exist in nature but felt true in the logic of children's understanding. "Daddy? Yeah, baby. Are you happy now?" The question deserved honest consideration. James thought about the past months, the confrontation, the media storm, the restructuring, the daily choice to prioritize presence over productivity. "Getting there, are you?" Emily snuggled closer, her small, warm body fitting perfectly against his side. "Yeah, you're home more. That makes me happy." Simple truth from a child who understood priorities better than most adults. James kissed the top of her head, breathed in strawberry shampoo, and the fleeting innocence of childhood that wouldn't last forever but could be cherished while it did. "I love you to the moon and back, baby girl. And back, always and back." They lay there watching stars that weren't real and somehow mattered more than the real ones because of what they represented. Sarah's final gift, a way to hold on to wonder even when the world proved itself cruel and arbitrary and unfair. Eventually, Emily fell asleep, her breathing deepening into the rhythm of dreams. James extracted himself carefully, covered her with the blanket Sarah had knitted during her final months when she could still manage the small movements required for simple tasks. In his own room, Sarah's photograph smiled from the dresser. James picked it up, traced the outline of her face with one finger. "I think I'm finally getting it right. The balance between building something that matters and being present for what matters most." The photo didn't answer. Photos never did. But somehow the weight that had been pressing on his chest for 2 years felt lighter. James climbed into bed, exhausted in the way that came from a full day well lived rather than obligations grudgingly fulfilled. Sleep came easily, dreamless and peaceful. He woke to Emily jumping on the bed at 6 a.m., Mr. Trunks flying through the air, her laughter bright as sunlight. "Daddy, it snowed! Can we build a snowman?" Through the window, Brooklyn was transformed into something clean and new, covered in the first snow of the season, the world remaking itself overnight the way it sometimes did when you weren't looking. Absolutely. But first, pancakes. They made breakfast together, Emily carefully pouring batter while James supervised. The pancakes came out almost perfect, recognizably bear-shaped, golden brown, not remotely burned. Progress. After breakfast, they bundled into winter coats and boots, headed to the park where other families were already building snowmen and throwing snowballs and creating memories that would last long after the snow melted. Emily threw herself into construction with characteristic intensity, rolling snow into perfect spheres while James provided engineering consultation. The snowman that emerged was lopsided and wonderful, topped with a carrot nose Emily had specifically requested they bring. She stepped back to admire their work, mittened hands on hips. "What should we name him? What do you think?" Emily considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Frosty. That's a good name for a snowman." "Frosty it is." They stood there, looking at their creation, Emily's small hand finding his larger one. James squeezed gently, feeling the connection that Sarah had built between them, the foundation strong enough to survive her absence. Around them, Brooklyn continued its morning routine. families building snowmen, dogs chasing snowballs, the city remaking itself into something magical for a few hours before the salt trucks came and reality reasserted itself. But for now, in this moment, magic was enough. Emily tugged his hand. Can we come back tomorrow and see if Frosty's still here? Absolutely. And the next day? Every day until he melts. Promise? James looked down at his daughter, at Sarah's eyes staring up at him with absolute trust. To the moon and back, promise. Emily grinned, satisfied. She released his hand to throw herself backward into the snow, making angel shapes with arms and legs, while laughing at the sky. James watched her play, this incredible small person who carried Sarah's legacy forward simply by existing, by being brave and curious and determined to find joy even in a world that had taken her mother too soon. Somewhere, he liked to believe, Sarah was watching too. Proud of the daughter who remembered her through 7-year-old understanding, proud of the man who'd stumbled and failed and kept trying anyway to honor the promises he'd made to a dying woman about building something that mattered. The snow continued falling, covering the city in temporary transformation. James tilted his face up to meet it, let the cold kiss of winter settle on his skin, felt the weight of 2 years of grief beginning to transmute into something that might eventually become peace. Not today, not completely, but someday. Emily grabbed his hand, pulled him down into the snow beside her. "Make an angel, Daddy!" So he did, lay in the snow making angel shapes next to his daughter, both of them laughing at the absurdity and perfection of the moment. Above them, invisible beyond the clouds and snow and the miles of atmosphere that separated Earth from space, the moon hung in daylight sky, waiting for night, waiting to be reached, to the moon and back, always and back.